Today, Tu B'Shvat, February 6, 2023, the Parsha is Yitro, really, among these important parshiot in the book of Shemot. Of course, we don't want to denigrate any of the parshas that are not important, but I'll take Yitro over like the Torah. Okay, any day. At any rate, here this parsha contains the meaning of Yitro and Moshe. We've talked about that in the past. It contains the revelation at Mount Sinai. We talked about that also, and of course the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments. So I'm going to focus on the Ten Commandments today, and we're going to focus on one of those commandments. Again, I don't want to use this as my total punching bag, but we have an interpretive dilemma when it comes to reading the Bible, and that has to do with culture and the way that culture imposes upon us through various forms and various media certain kinds of images that, because they are visual images, they are just so hard to shake out of your head. Okay, so I am going to give you some of the classic presentations here. Just I'm going to tee up my problem with something that is just abundantly obvious to everyone. Okay, when we study the Ten Commandments, the visual depiction has shaped the way we think about them. We think of them as two large slabs, 5 on one slab, 5 on the other slab, with Hebrew lettering, Assyrian Hebrew, not Paleo-Hebrew. Assyrian Hebrew, which is the square script of the Torah that we use now, and the square script that we would recognize from reading a Hebrew text, the text of the Siddur, for example, or the Chumash, is not the ancient Hebrew script. I'm sure I've done this in the past. The Hebrew script is an ancient Hebrew script. Let me just, I'll take that for a second and show you what it looks like. Okay, so it would look like this. This is the ancient Hebrew script. Okay, and you can see, and I just pulled up, around. There happens to be somebody who made the fonts. So I'm going to Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Chaf, I guess, so that's what it looks like. Okay, and you may have seen this before. And since the Bible, the Torah, we are talking about somewhere in the 10th century BCE, the script that would have been used to inscribe the Ten Commandments would have been the script that I just showed you, and not the script that we have in front of us. And that just is for all of us who are used to a certain way of thinking, that's a mind-blowing idea. But it should become a much more popular idea that at some point, and it had to do probably with the first exile of the Jews to Babylonia, where instead they had similar languages, but they used the Assyrian Babylonian alphabet, and that became the dominant alphabet. It would be akin to saying today that the Cyrillic alphabet that is used by our Russian brothers and sisters, because most of us can't read that, that the Latin alphabet dominates, and so we want everything transcribed. So the Hebrew that we have is a letter for letter transcription of the Paleo-Hebrew. They're related. These two alphabets are related, but the Assyrian alphabet became the dominant alphabet, such that the Torah that we read today, we think of it as authentic, but it's actually not. It's an authentic reproduction of Babylonian Assyrian Hebrew, but not Canaanite Hebrew. Okay. Having said that, let me go back to where I was. Just a second. So we consider, we think of, the way that the Ten Commandments are represented as two slabs. Okay, so I often ask the question, well, how much would they have weighed? Let's look at the photo of Charlton Heston here. Okay, that's an image that we kind of have in our imagination of the Ten Commandments. Right, here's the beautiful Charlton Heston, and here, okay, so they got it right, and I've not deciphered this. I bet you this is Anochi, but I think that these are random. I'm not sure. I didn't spend time to try and transcribe this, okay? But they got it right, okay? Because I bet you they had a good consultant on the film who said, look, if you're talking about the Bible, this is what they use. This is script, okay? And of course, even to our untrained eyes, looking at it this way tells you one significant thing. It just says ancient. And in fact, if you go to the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, where the Isaiah scroll is put on display, it's actually a copy, not the real one. The real one's too fragile to display, but you will see in the Isaiah scroll, when it comes to writing the name of God is written with this script, but everything else is written with the Assyrian script. And that's because they are preserving antiquity in even the writing. Okay, so here, when we think of the Ten Commandments, we tend to think of an image something like this, or this, okay? And what's elegant about this, are a number of things, okay? What's elegant is, well, it's easy to put on a tablet, okay? It's very iconic. This is very iconic. And each slab has 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each has 2 words, and these 2 words are the first 2 words of every commandment. So Anochi Adonai, Lo yeh, lo tisah, zachor et, kabed et, lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, lo taneh, lo tachmod. I am the Lord, you shall have no other gods. Do not take my name, do not misuse my name. Remember the Sabbath day, honor your parents, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, do not covet. Okay? 10 commandments, and that's that. And all you need to do is look at that, and you will have a mental image of the 10 commandments. The critical aspect of my inquiry would take me down one avenue, which would be, so at what point does this become the dominant iconography or imagery of the 10 commandments? I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not even sure where to do the research for it, but that to me would be a great question. It's at what point does this become the dominant image, and why? Well, I think it has to do, my hunch is it has to do with the characteristic way that the rabbis define the 10 commandments. Here's another, classic depiction. And before I get to why it goes that way, I just want to ask these curious questions. How much would they weigh, right? So if we take an engravable rock, it's about 2.8 grams per cubic centimeter. I estimate that what Charlton Heston is holding is 12 inches by 24. It's 288 square inches. So we're going to go with 1 inch thick slabs, because a half inch you'll crack. You can't chisel on a half an inch. You got 288 cubic inches, blah 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 blah. It's about 30 pounds, okay? Maybe more, okay? The way that it's depicted, 30 pounds to carry on your chest, and not do anything else. It's really hard. Now, of course, it's the 10 Commandments. It's the Bible. It's a miracle. It doesn't matter. And of course, the rabbis say that the letters of the commandments were actually flutter. Each letter had wings on it that were fluttering and gave the stone, which was very heavy, a very, very high lift. But I just want to stop for a second and say, okay, look, very nice. It's very nice. We could invent all sorts of machinations, imagery, and magic to it. The rabbis had their reason for doing that. It's not because they wanted you to take it literally. No way. They were speaking in a very figurative and poetic language and saying that this lift, the words themselves carry the rock, and it fits a certain idea. And the idea, one second, Susie, the idea is that when they violate the commandments, the text lifts off the rock, and all that is left is rock. And therefore it becomes too heavy for Moses to hold, and he drops them. That is such a marvelous theological insight. And it basically says a truth. The truth is, it's the expression, it's not worth the paper that it's written on, right? If you do not abide by the spirit of the words, then what's the paper worth? What's the text worth? What's it all about? It's nothing, right? And so you might as well throw it. It has no holiness whatsoever, okay? And so our problem, I'm teeing this up, the problem in focusing on the image is that it takes your mind and interpretation in one direction and quite literally concretizes the text in a certain way that leads to certain kinds of interpretations, which may or may not be there. Now, the rabbis did this because they categorized the commandments, as we'll see. But let's stop there. And Susie, you have a question, then Ned.
Yeah. So there's also the matter of adrenaline.
Okay.
There are those stories about there's a car wreck and somebody's underneath the car and somebody lifts up the car who's not a bodybuilder because with adrenaline you have more force than you would otherwise. So if you're on top of the mountain and you're getting the word of God on these stones, your adrenaline's running high. And then when you see what happens at the foot of the mountain, it drains. Okay,
but that's a perfect illustration of my point, which is like, we could talk about all sorts of superhuman and supernatural aspects of this, and miss the point altogether, which is that there's a text here. The text is on stone. The way that the imagination and artists have depicted it is so out of proportion to what is, feasible and possible. And let's just add one little fact here, one little point, let's say, that the stone tablets are to be deposited in the safety deposit box of the people, namely the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant is about 40 inches by 30 inches or 27 inches, something like that. So at the very, very most, the tablets have to be the size of of my laptop. I have a 15, I would say that the tablets, in order to fit in the box, they have to be the size of, let's say, a large floor tile, okay? You have a ceramic floor tile, maybe, 12 by 12, right? Have you ever tried to pick one of those up? They're not light, okay? And then if you ever try to scratch on them or incise on them, or you'll chip away at them. And so it's not so simple, okay, to do this, to think about this. The point is that the way that we have visually depicted this skews our understanding of it in one direction. And what I want to do is kind of bring it all the way back. But before that, Nanette, go ahead. You have to unmute. Don't forget.
I did. So Rabbi, I feel like I'm a tiny bit confused, because if Moses was a prophet, and if we know that it's through the prophets that we receive the information from God, then who really wrote, quote unquote, the 10 Commandments?
So all we have here to rely on is the text itself. The text tells us that God speaks, and that Moses goes up, and the tablets are engraved by God, be'etzba Elohim, in the finger of God. And so I'm going to just say, who knows what that means? We don't know what that means. This is, there obviously is a whole spectrum of interpretation on this. And I've just put, where I claim my place on the spectrum, which is, I don't know what this means. And I'll even go further and say, this is figurative language. Okay. And because the Torah and all the texts speak in a human language, it's trying to approximate what is essentially, we can't, depict this. We can't, the centrality of the idea is that there is a moment of contact. The whole scene at Mount Sinai is based on an idea that God breaks through and has something to say to people. And even saying God has something to say opens up a big philosophical question, which is, how does God say? How does God speak? Maimonides dealt with this in the 12th century in the Guide for the Perplexed. This is one of his questions, which is, if you say that God speaks, then you're automatically saying that God has an instrument, a vocalization. And what you're saying then is God has a voice. And if you're saying that God has a voice, you're saying that God has a body, but God does not have a body. And so it goes on and on and on from there. And so what Maimonides says is like, and here I'll use a favorite metaphor. It's like, I have a computer, and the signal that I'm giving to the computer is my voice, and the computer translates it into electronic, bytes, and then creates other electronic information. It goes to my modem, it goes out to your modem, and in some way that I'm guessing none of us can adequately explain, right? So people can explain this, but none of us can explain it. It gets to you, okay? Or a simpler metaphor would be the radio. The radio, the station is in, WCBS, they're in Hudson, wherever in New York. They have people in a studio. They speak into a microphone. The microphone translates it into electronic signals. The signals go out to an antenna. The antenna is converted to wave information. The wave information goes and bounces off the ionosphere, comes down to our radio. The radio then translates that back into sound, okay? It's a nice metaphor for this to say, something happens. And the actual medium of communication is, to us, a mystery. It's a mystery. But here's the evidence. The evidence is, we have it. We have a text. Whether it is a human text or God is we just don't know. I wish we had a snapshot. I wish we had a recording. I wish we had all that, but we don't. So what we have is the testimony of generations of people who have received it and transmitted it. And that's where we're at with that. So my problem now in the text that we have, what we've done with it is we've depicted it visually. And that visual depiction takes us away from what I think is on it, the content. Okay, let's go back then to the content. All right, and try and see if there may be another way to understand the text from the way it is presented. And I will show you as follows. Okay, so this is admittedly, if we were to take the literal truth, take the text literally and say that Moses received the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, it wouldn't have looked like this. It would have looked like the Paleo script that I showed you before. But these are the words that make up the Ten Commandments. So rather than put them on two tablets, look what they look like. And here I just put them in a box. Okay, so it's not big at all. Okay, I mean, this is a page of an 8.5 by 11 sheet on my computer. It's a simulation of that. So this is maybe 2/3 of the page. and you can't read any of it. That's probably, but now I'll make it larger, okay? And we have the dots on it. Of course, it wouldn't have had dots. The dots are a later invention of vocalization. And all this has to do with the kind of the methodology and the kind of nuts and bolts of the language. The language didn't have the dots and was in a different script, okay? That being said, I'm going to offer the fact that there were the same amount of letters and words. The words are exactly the same, and the number of characters are the same. And how many characters do we have? I did a little word count, and we have 1,346 characters in the text, and there are 172 words in the Ten Commandments. Okay, so from Anochi to the end, V'chol asher l'recha is 172, and that's what it looks like. And if you were good at carving, you could probably get it on a bathroom tile sized stone. Okay, so it could, theoretically fit into the case, the chest, namely the Ark of the Covenant. If you think of, for example, I'm going to stop the share here, but if you think of, for example, this classic piece of ancient text, which is inscribed, this is the Rosetta Stone. So I have here the Rosetta Stone. Click to enlarge. I hope you see. Can you see it? You all see it? So this is the Rosetta Stone. The height of the Rosetta Stone is 44 inches. There are about 100 lines of text on it. See, look at this. This is the Greek translate. This is Greek inscription of text. I want you to notice a couple of things about it. First of all, none of us, I don't think, can read Greek. Where do the words start and stop? You don't know, because there are no spaces between words. There's no punctuation. So this is characteristic of ancient script. The Rosetta Stone dates from, I think, the 3rd century BCE, if I remember correctly, from my Wikipedia examination. There are about 100 lines of text on it, in all the different things. These lines are much bigger than these lines. So the size of this, I estimated the size to be about a third. It's about a third of an inch, maybe a quarter of an inch, that each line is about a quarter of an inch. Okay, if that's the case in our text, there are about 40 lines, so it would have been maybe 10 inches long. That kind of makes sense. Okay, but this is what ancient script looks like, and this is a magnificent example of something that would have been about 700 years after the giving of the 10 Commandments. Okay, and the 10 Commandments would have been inscribed in a similar way, without differences between words, and without spaces, and without punctuation. Okay, and I know I get in trouble whenever I do this, and I know, well, you don't like when I do these kinds of things, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so I have this little shtick, okay, about saying, okay, so if a text is to be taken seriously, you take the number of the words in the text, and you take that seriously because people did take it seriously. After all, the Masoretic tradition, the word Masora, these are people that had the tradition of, counting all the features of the text. Admittedly, they're much later, but the tradition of how to write the text is so powerful in Judaism, down to the very letter of the text and down to even the very vocalization of the text. So numbers of words and numbers of letters are significant. So then what happens when you look at the text? If you divide it exactly in two, where's the middle of the text? Well, in this version, and of course we have another version in Deuteronomy, it's slightly different, and I'm not going into that one, but I'm just going to focus on this one here. And they have different differences that are significant, just in one or two details. But if you read carefully, we have the middle of the text, somewhere in the commandment of the Sabbath. Zachor et yom haShabbat l'kodsho sheishet yamim tavod v'asita kol melachtecha. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. To keep it holy, we'll talk about that in a minute. 6 days you shall work and do all of your work, and the seventh day will be Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha. So what do we have here? The Exodus version, 172 words. The midwords are kol melachtecha. That means 86 here, 86 there. I don't know if 86 has any significance. I'm not interested in right now. I'm interested in just the raw kind of middle of it. And I'll tell you why in a second. The center of the Ten Commandments is Shabbat. The center is your work. What happens if we shift our focus from the traditional categories? In the traditional categories, the Ten Commandments are 5 commandments between man and God, and they are the first 5. I am God. You shall have no other gods. Do not misuse God's name. Remember Shabbat. Honor your father and mother. And of course, we could go and give a lecture on each one of them, as I've done in the past. And the second category is commandments between man and man. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, do not covet. In other words, there are 5 commandments that are govern your relationship with God, okay? That you should know that there is God, that you shall have no other gods, that you shall not misuse the name of God. I mean, I'm saying, I'm translating commandment 3 not by do not take the Lord's name in vain, which is a kind of silly way of understanding that commandment. That says that anytime you say, God damn, that means you're going to get, a lightning bolt from heaven. It's not that at all. Do not misuse God's name is do not justify your evil actions by the name of God as saying that they're God. Do not, for example, do things in the name of God that will embarrass and defame God in the world. And I would add I would put in that category, for example, the 9/11 terror attacks. They were done in the name of God. Nothing has destroyed the name of God more than evil committed in God's name, and that is why it's in the Ten Commandments. To say that that taking God's name in vain is like when I say, "Oh my God, I dropped my phone. God damn it!" Like that. That's misusing. That's ridiculous. Okay, it's when evil is committed in the name of God, there is nothing worse for God. It's not an accident, say some cultural critics, that the rise of atheism and agnosticism and moving away from anything to do with religion increases after the 9/11 attacks, because if people said, if that's what you do in the name of God, I'm out. I don't want to have anything to do. I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or whatever. That's, if God can motivate people to do that kind of evil, I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's a kind of baby and bathwater argument, and that people on the religious side are battling with it. We're in a polemic against that. It's not what God is. This is evil, pure and simple. And you can do evil in the name of God. And there's nothing more evil than doing evil in the name of God. End of story. Okay. So the first 5 commandments are commandments that are between man and God. And then because Shabbat is Shabbat to God. And the second set of commandments is, what you do among yourselves. Don't kill each other. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal from each other. Don't lie. Do not covet. All of those are human relations, okay? But we have a question. There's a flag on the field. Marlene Herman, go ahead. Go ahead.
I hate to be an apicorus, but if you say that's a misuse of God's name, that's what we believe. The guy who thought he was doing it in God's name, did he really believe it?
Yeah, so this is our argument with people who do that and say that there is no God that justifies the murder of innocent human beings. That can't be a statement of opinion the same way that I prefer chocolate over vanilla. And this is a worldview that is in debate today, right? Which is, is there something called a universal law, a radical evil that we can all agree and define? And the proposition, which I guess, and I'm glad you raised it, Marlene, because in our day, it's a debatable proposition where you can say, well, sometimes it's okay to kill innocent people, and it's never okay to kill innocent people, notwithstanding the fact that innocent people get killed all the time in ways that unfortunately happen. So they're going to argue that the killing of innocents is collateral damage for the larger goal, which is to bring God's kingdom here on earth. Okay, and that's just absurd. I mean, it's to justify the killing of innocents in a way that lines up with this is what God wants, runs counter to everything that we understand in our moral lives. Okay, go ahead, Gitel.
Yeah, so it's clear that the first four are between man and God.
Yeah.
Why does honor your father and mother not be like a bridge between the two?
Okay, well,
I
I think you got a gold star there, Gitel, because that's what you've been taught, and that's everything, and that we've all been taught that, and that's honor your mother. I wrote this here. There's a problem with that categorization because honor your mother and your father, kind of, that's a human commandment, really. So how does the tradition understand it? They understand it as a bridge. Okay. Honoring your parents, is it a commandment between man and God or man and man? The traditional answer is that it is the fulcrum commandment. It's the commandment that connects God and man. Nice.
Wait, but if we are created in God's image, we are God to other people. They see God in us each. So that's still part of the God relationship with the people.
Are you talking about this commandment?
The fifth commandment.
Yeah, look, I mean, Rabbi Marlene Herman, you gave me a great sermon, okay? No, I'm serious. This is, what I'm trying to say is we have such an ingrained idea of, like, I started with the visual, but I'm also going with this. We have an ingrained idea that this is the way you should know it, 5 + 5. And this is the way you understand it, exactly as Gitel, exactly as Marlene, all of these are great sermons. They're great homilies, that nothing is more important than honoring your parents, and honoring your parents is the fulcrum idea. And it's because we are partners, we've all given those sermons. I've given them, and you've understood them, and they're great. And we can have a kiddush and a luncheon and sit and discuss to our heart's content. And they're beautiful religious ideas. It's just, I'm going to say, great. Is that the only way to see the text? Is there another way? Go ahead, Gitel.
So if we are created in God's image, then even the "you shall not murder" falls from God also, because God is not murdering.
Welcome to the Talmud. Okay. Welcome to rabbinic reading. So absolutely. And why stop at murder? Every commandment is in a way, every commandment, do not steal, give back, lost objects. Those are also divine commandments. There's a bit of, God in everything. Okay. So why leave it to that? So I'm going to offer the fact that the possibility that the construction of these two categories is an artificial imposition on the Ten Commandments, precisely because we love to do this. We love, and I'm going to fall into the same trap in a second. We love to make these kinds of structures because they enable us to convey, I think, very nice truths, very important truths, and important lessons, including the category that, there are things that I do that are in the realm of me and God, and there are things that I do in the realm of me and another human being. That's an important categorization. Okay, it's very useful. But rather than see the
Can I just say something, please?
Go ahead, Elana. I didn't see you.
I don't have a problem with the placement of the fifth commandment, because in many prayers, also in the Bible, it says, okay, so in the prayer book, Avinu Malkeinu,
Right.
Ha'av al-Haman.
Right.
So God is our parent. So yeah. So why not put it in the
And
first
again,
5 commandments?
you know, we have, you give me a lot of material, a lot of preachable material. These are great ideas, you know, and they're truthful ideas in the sense that they convey, you know, essential truths about human beings and our relationship with God, our relationship with our parents. You know, your parent is an authority figure in your life, and you learn to relate to the world through that. Why is honoring your parents anyway in the Ten Commandments? Because, you know, let's just say the proposition of the Ten Commandments is these are the best rules. Okay, the claim that is being made here, it's almost a chauvinistic claim. It is a show. It's that if you want a set of rules to live by, you can't get much better than the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments include the following: know that you have a divine authority. Know that the worst kind of thing is to have false authority. Know that the next thing that is worse is to use that authority to justify evil. And know that there is one day in the week that is central. Know that your parents are the structuring element of your society. The family is the basic unit. Do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not cheat, lie, and do not covet, right? And if you do those things, you stand a chance to live a decent life, okay? And really, that's all you need. I mean, it's a fascinating claim, and they have stood the test of time. Notwithstanding the fact that I don't think we understand them, especially the first 3. The ones that relate to God, we completely don't understand. Most people understand what a Sabbath is. Most people understand what it means to honor and respect your parents. And people generally understand what it means not to murder, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to cheat, not to lie, not to covet. Okay? In general, these are great principles to live by. And so what is happening here, just in the broadest context possible, is Moses goes up to the mountain and gets, like, here's the key to unlock a meaningful life. God, no other gods, don't misuse the name of God, remember Sabbath, honor your parents, don't kill, murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. And if you do that, you'll be covenant to me, you'll have the basics, okay? And everything else is basically, you know, on top. These are, you know, all sorts of other things, but this is the core. Okay, Bob Lutke.
In terms of breaking down the binary thinking that you're talking about.
Bob, we have a bad connection here, so I'm missing every third word.
Try turning off your picture. It might work better that way.
If you turn your video off, you might get the more bandwidth. I'm sorry.
In terms of man.
Try it again. Start again.
And God.
No good.
Bob, I know you have valuable things to say. Maybe you write it in the chat and we'll read it.
Okay.
I can't. Your picture's off and your video, your audio is.
Hello.
Now you're back. Okay, where are you?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes. But I can't hear you now. Bob, write it up, and we'll try and read it to you. Okay.
Also honoring.
No good.
Bob, no good. No good. No, I can't hear you. It's very frustrating. We're gonna go to Nanette. Okay, Bob. Go to Nanette.
Okay. So just for a second, just for a second, if we think out of the box, Rabbi and Claire, does it even really matter in what order the 10 Commandments are?
Yes,
Because
it matters.
they're, yes?
It totally
Yes?
matters. It totally, look,
Okay.
everything in life matters. You don't put you put the first most important, and there's a structure to life. It works with everything. There's page 1 of the New York Times that puts you the most important stories, and the back page would give you the least important. So the structure matters. Yes, go ahead, Ilana.
So in another book, I don't remember if it's in Vaikra or Bamidbar, where it says, איש אמו ואביו תיראו, ואת שבתותי תשמורו. Meaning, you don't have to honor your parents if they don't let you observe the Shabbat.
So when we get to the middle of
or other things,
when we get to the middle of Leviticus, you see that the 10 Commandments, go through all sorts of different, iterations, and that commandment goes through a set of iterations. It's not an accident that Leviticus 19, I think it's verse 19, verse 11 or so, is connects the observance of Shabbat to the parents. Okay, and what the interpretation that you cited is the classic rabbinic interpretation, which is, why are these two consecutive, and why are these two commandments, the Sabbath and your parents, conjoined basically? And the answer is because if your parents tell you not to observe Shabbat, you don't have to listen to them, which is it's a huge statement. It's a radical statement. It says that the only circumstance under which you can undermine your parents is if your parents undermine your relationship with God. If your parents undermine your relationship with God, you are not allowed to listen to them, or you are justified in not listening to them. That's a very radical statement. It tells you, about the way that the biblical view of what's important and what's the hierarchy. I'll give you one more example, because this, when we read the Talmud, the rabbis, the Mishnah, so we add another element in there. It's quite a radical innovation, and the rabbis, gently construct this dilemma in the following way, which is, if you have to return the lost object of your parent, or sorry, I may put it this way, which is the honor of your parent or the honor of your teacher, whose honor precedes whose? The rabbis say your teacher. It's self-serving, obviously. They say
the drowning teacher.
Your parents brought you into the world, this world, but your teacher brings you into the world to come. And wow, that's such a great statement. I mean, the cynic in me says, of course, it's so self-serving. The rabbis are constructing their own authority structure and they're justifying it. Okay, but isn't this true in the sense of what the rabbis are trying to do? And I go no further than the Passover Seder to demonstrate this, because if you read the Seder, the Haggadah, carefully, you'll see that in the first scene of the Haggadah, okay, it's Ma Nishtana, the child asks the questions, and then you have Maaseh, Rabbi, all the different rabbis, and I'm constantly amazed. I said, so where's his wife? So where are their children? So where are the kids? They're just sitting there together, a bunch of rabbis at a table? What? This is a family moment. This is, and the students come back from the house of study or from wherever, and they have a debate, okay? And so I look at that and I'm gonna go what's going on here? Where's the family here? And the answer is very simple. There is no family here. It's a parallel structure of authority that is meant to be in tension with the family structure. And those of us who experience this, both as children and as parents, know exactly what I'm talking about. Your kid comes home that's more religious than you, right? Or, it throws the whole structure of the family into a turmoil, okay? And because the kid has the ultimate justification and says, I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to listen to you. I'll do whatever I want. because God said so. Go ahead.
But if your parents do teach you the good ways, they come first.
Of course. And you
To
know,
make the children feel better, yeah.
so exactly. And so, I've often had to kind of negotiate these kinds of situations because, let's face it, in our congregation, we have many people whose children have become super religious, to the point that they won't eat in their parents' homes, they won't do anything like that. And it's deeply, deeply painful. Okay. It's one thing, a lot of one things. Okay. And so the question then becomes, what do you do? What do you advise the parents under these circumstances? And what do you advise if the children are coming to you, what do you advise? And there are ways to negotiate this. And in my other class, we've talked about these things. We have, in Israel today, and of course in contemporary Jewish life, we have all sorts of combinations of people. Never mind parents and children, but you have situations where you have one spouse and another spouse. The spouses love each other deeply, deeply, deeply. And let's say they start out their married life together as a religious couple. And then, 5-10 years into the marriage, one couple says, I'm not religious anymore. And what do you do? So sometimes they go to very, very, very religious rabbis, and the rabbis who are not kind of mindful of things beyond just their own kind of 4 cubits of halakha say, well, you have to get divorced. You're not living the right life, which is a horrible thing to advise people. So in the one anecdote which I brought to the class, where this dilemma happened, where the husband becomes not religious and the wife remains religious, and the marriage is just on the knife's edge of collapsing, and she goes to the last rabbi on her list of people who advise her, and the rabbi was very, very kind and says, okay, you've told me what's wrong in your marriage. What's right? What's going right? And she explains with emotion. The burden lifts off. She said, well, we love each other very much. And then he said, can you manage to live together even under these circumstances? She said, yeah. Can you build a life together like this? Yeah. You have children together, you have life together, you can do it together. Can you figure out a way to do this? And he said, yeah. So it means that in our context, maybe there's something more important. And you know what? Maybe there is. And the possibility of saying, maybe there is something more important than what the Torah says, that in some circles is so radical and so blasphemous, they don't, you can't even have a conversation with that. But people don't live in that circumstance. People live in their lives. And if you want to be reckless and ruin people's lives, you say to people, well, you got to get divorced, you got to end your life, you got to, rather than say in a creative way, in an understanding way, life is different than it was in the Bible or for the rabbis. We don't live in the 18th century. We don't live in the 19th century. It's much more complicated now. Let's see. Maybe there's a way to do this. Maybe there's a way to navigate your religious devotion with their secularity. And you know what? It can be beautiful. It can be amazing. And you know what? So you won't have to live in this neighborhood. You'll live in another neighborhood. So you think doors will close and doors will open, and you will see other possibilities. And you know what? Maybe for this, that's what you've been chosen for. And I find that to be tremendously satisfying in terms of a way to approach. Okay, Bob, did you send us? You sent us. Okay, can honoring one's father and mother also mean honoring the creators? Yes. The givers of call, yes, rather than binary thinking. Don't all 10 commandments relate to the intersectionality of God and humanity and nature, whether the letters appear on stone, parchment, or other materials? Absolutely. So, and here, I know you're using intersectionality with 2 or 3 entendres here, okay? Because, we have all sorts of things intersecting here, but we have the divine and the human intersecting with text, okay? And what you're saying here is that there is a way that this is these primary elements here, namely, parents, are the connecting elements of the world. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, so what you were saying about making things work. So I had a neighbor. She lives, I don't know where she lives now. She was a Jewish teacher, religious teacher in, I think, early childhood. her first husband was a rabbi. I don't know what happened to that marriage. So she had a second marriage. And at some point, she told me that her, several years into that second marriage, her husband became a born-again Christian.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then.
And she said something to the effect that, and I'm thinking to myself, how can she stay with him? It's like this is like, you're like two different worldviews. And she said everything else about the relationship is wonderful. She said there's just this, and I don't know, they managed to make it.
Look, everybody has to negotiate what their boundaries are. Never mind, today with Christianity. Look, we have had situations where marriages go on, and of course, at some point, it's not only converting religion; it's converting gender. We have situations where an adult female realizes that she no longer wants to be a female and that she's actually a man. So we had one case like this. It wasn't members; it was related to members, where the individual changed her gender. She became male, and the husband in the relationship said, "Look, I have a choice," and they stayed together. And you have to kind of stop and say that life,
Wow.
Life is really complicated, and what does that mean? So it means that for the man, he now has to understand himself in a homosexual relationship rather than a heterosexual relationship. Can he make that transition? And of course, the same is true for the woman who transitioned. And so they put their relationship ahead of their sexuality, which I don't think could work in the vast majority of cases, like the 99% of cases, okay, where husbands wouldn't be that generous. Okay, we go on. So my point is that the text divides up like this, okay, in the Shabbat, and it actually divides up not only with words but with characters. That means that the symmetry of the text is not 5 and 5 at the very least, but I have another useful handle on the text, which is that the fulcrum of the text is not the 5 first and the 5 second, but the fulcrum of the text is the Sabbath. And that's interesting. And I'm going to say it's interesting. Shabbat is the central commandment of the Torah. I could say do not murder is a much more important commandment, but in terms of the day-to-day living of a community as a people, the thing that shapes the people as a people most is Shabbat. Okay, that's the proposition of this claim, that it comes right at the center of the text to tell you the centrality of this commandment more than any other commandment in terms of defining and shaping the life of the people. Okay. Of course, not murdering is more important morally, right? And of course, all the others are supremely moral. But in terms of shaping a people and its relationship in its life with God, I can't think of a much more central commandment than Shabbat. And I'm going to prove it because of this chapter that we read. I read this week in Shul at Mincha. So forgive me for those of you who were there, but in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 11, which we would never read, but it's a beautiful rendition of the covenant, okay, as the Jews are coming back from exile, and they kind of have this moment where they need to understand who they are. And so in a compressed statement of who they are, it says, in addition to the following, you made a covenant, you chose Abraham. I'll pick it up with verse 11. You split the sea, which was last week's Parasha. They passed through the sea on dry land, but their pursuers you threw into the depths like a stone into the raging waters. With a pillar of cloud you led them by day, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light. By the way they were to go on Mount Sinai, you came down and spoke to them from heaven. You gave them the right rules, the true teaching, the good laws and commandments. Your holy Sabbath you made known to them. and you'd ordained for them laws and commandments and teaching through Moses, your servant, bread from heaven. You gave them, and they were hungry, produced water from the rock. You told them to go and possess the land as well. The only commandment that is identified in this covenant is Shabbat. So you ask yourself, why? So I would like to say, because it's the center of the Ten Commandments. But set that aside. I know that that's not plausible. Let's stop at because it's the most important commandment in terms of making your people. It's more important than tzitzis. It's more important than tefillin. It's more important than eating kosher. It's more important than, not rounding off the corner of your field. Take the 612 other commandments, maybe 608. Take a whole hundreds of other commandments and set them on the side. The fact that Nehemiah here is saying, this is it. This is what he gave you. He told you that, he gave you good laws. And the Sabbath means that it has a status over all other things, to which I would add, of course it does. Like Ahad says, and this is the ultimate quote about the Sabbath, more than the people of Israel have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jewish people, right? What a brilliant statement. And it just makes sense on every level. If you have a day that you are devoted to your family, that you're going to do separate things, that you're going to come and be with your community, that you're going to hear a lovely sermon, that you're going to have lovely meals, that you're going to rejoice with people at their life cycle, that you're going to live and breathe the rhythm of a communal life. If you have just a fraction of that, as Jews have had many fractions of that throughout the centuries, okay, then you'll have a people. It's just that simple, okay? You'll have a community. Look, we are a shul, right? It's taken a long time to kind of realize this, but you measure the shul on the basis of Shabbat, period. You don't measure the shul on the basis of a fundraiser. You don't measure the shul on the basis of how many people come to a dinner, let them all come. You don't measure the shul on the basis of every other thing, but it's the central pulse of the shul. It's the Shabbat life is the heart. That's the beating heart of the shul, of any community. And so because it belongs to any community, it's the whole people. And, we can give example after example after example of that. If in Israel, Shabbat has a sustaining quality, regardless of how you observe Shabbat, the most observant to the least observant, because there's a qualitative difference to that day for everyone in the whole culture. That's a phenomenal achievement as a civilization, okay? And so the idea of having a day to make as the cornerstone of your civilization is it's central. What I want to say, it doesn't surprise me in the least that the central feature of Jewish peoplehood is precisely at the center of the text of the Ten Commandments. That may be coincidence, and okay, fine, but my overwhelming experience in reading texts like this leads me to the possibility, at least the possibility, that what you find at the center of the text is the hardcore nucleus of the idea. And I've tried to show this in many, many different examples. The 23rd Psalm is my favorite example. What's at the center of the 23rd Psalm? Ata imati, you are with me. It doesn't matter. All religion depends on you are with me. You are with me. The relationship, okay? And many, many, many other examples like that. And so here, I would say that this is the center of the text because it's the center of our civilization. Nothing is as extraordinary to Judaism as Shabbat. Susie, you were saying, I heard from another teacher. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, there's another teacher who's, I don't remember who it was, but also talks about what's center in the text. The other thing about Shabbat is even in time of Nehemiah, it was still a very radical idea, and nevertheless, he was putting it, he was emphasizing it.
So I know we're over. I just want to go on for just a couple more minutes, because I think it's not only central to Jewish civilization, it happens to be central, I think, to the idea of freedom altogether. Okay, it's the central commandment. Okay, the seventh day, Yom HaShvi, Shabbat Adonai Elohecha, lo taseh chom lacha ata uvincha uvitecha, avdecha v'amadcha v'emtecha v'gerecha asher b'sherecha. You are not to make any work. You, your son, your daughter, your servant, your maid, your beast, your sojourner within your gates. Okay, and I don't have time to go through that, but I want to say, what do we make of the words you, your son, your daughter, your servant, your maidservant, your animal, and the stranger in your gates? At first glance, they seem superfluous. It's almost an internal gloss on lo tasem kol malacha. In other words, if the commandment would be sufficient if it said, remember the Sabbath day, don't do any work. But why does it have to spell out the whole list? Why? Well, in the second commandment, we have the same, it says, don't make any other gods. It doesn't say, don't make you, your servant, your man. So I have a suggestion. It's a necessary addition to a problematic nature of lo taseh. Because after all, you could argue that Shabbat is for me and not my dependents. After all, I'm the head of the household and they have to kowtow to me, okay? And I think that this is a really plausible reading, okay? Those of us who grew up or may have lived or continue to live in strongly patriarchal, units, know that the unit revolves around the strong central patriarchal figure, and that everybody has to kowtow to that individual. Okay, you could construct a society where the head of the household has the privilege of having the day of rest. Okay, look how radical the Torah is here. The Torah is saying, okay, yeah, we recognize that you're the breadwinner. We recognize that you're the leader. We recognize that you're the patriarch of the family. Too bad. It doesn't belong only to you. They have a right to this as much as you, full stop. Their Shabbat is no less than your Shabbat. You can make a claim that since you make all the money, since you do all the work, since you built the house, since you plow the field, since you do all that, since you defend, that you take apart, that you're more important. Fine.
Wait a second.
Okay. But doesn't entitle you to the fundamental idea of human equality, which is as follows: every human being under your roof, whether it's your son or daughter, or your maidservant, or your servant, or even your animal, is entitled to rest. That is a radical, egalitarian, and democratizing statement of the nature of humanity. And in fact, I think it's the universal idea of freedom, that a free person is entitled not to be subservient even to their parent. You, as a child, do not work for your parent on that day. You are also entitled to rest. It's a phenomenal statement, okay? Reactions. I know we're over here, but go ahead. Anybody?
Yeah, so even your slave.
Even your slave.
Or slavery then. So, one could easily say, okay, this applies to free people, but not to the slaves, because the slaves are the slaves. But it's even the slaves.
Okay, that's right. And so what the Shabbat does is Shabbat undermines slavery, okay? This is my little polemical understanding. When people say, well, the Bible justifies slavery, how can you do slavery? The Bible's, therefore the Bible's stupid, right? So I say the Bible is a snapshot on some level of its society too. But what the Bible has that the rest of society at the time doesn't have is it has a mechanism for dismantling slavery already built within it. And Shabbat is the mechanism for dismantling slavery. Why? Very simply, because if you give a slave a taste of freedom on one day of the week, it's quite likely that they're going to ask for freedom on more than one day of the week. They like it, and they're going to like being free, and that undermines slavery altogether. John.
Isn't it the book of Deuteronomy that extends this to slaves?
Here you have slaves also. You have slaves, Ata bin Chave. The whole commandment is rendered to those people in your household, including slaves, your maidservant and your manservant. Yeah, Deuteronomy will take it further, but and universal. We saw that in Professor Sommer. His presentation showed us a little more development, and because the Bible, we of course in this class can say these things without worrying about any kind of blasphemy or whatever. The idea that within the Torah itself there's historical development, I think, is proven by Deuteronomy itself. That Deuteronomy reflects a later stage of the law. You tell. Unmute.
So we say that slaves are free on Shabbat. Where does the rationale come through for a Shabbos guy? How can you have a Shabbos guy do something for you?
It's a great question. It's a great halachic question, and of course, the idea of having a servant, having someone do stuff for you, undermines Shabbat altogether. And so the rabbis, look, there emerged certain realities that the rabbis had to deal with, which and Jewish communities had to deal with, which is, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to let your house burn down? So. Are you supposed to live without light? Are you supposed to live without certain things? Are there ways that you can do this? So, the halakhic system developed all sorts of technicalities to find ways around this, that if you didn't exactly say to someone and they knew that they would, be able to do that, then it's fine. I mean, we employ non-Jewish people to turn on and unlock and lock and clean, etc. on Shabbat. And the idea is that we employ them. They're not bound by our Shabbat, and they're earning their gig. I think I know we don't have to prove to anybody how kind and generous and benevolent we are to our employees. I think we do a tremendous effort. We make a huge effort to be kind and benevolent to whoever works for us, understanding that they out of I think a sense of their own personal devotion, and with everyone that we've had, they have a real strong sense of devotion to our lives as a community. Okay, John, again, unmute. Sorry, you have to mute.
Someone mentioned Shabbos Goy. There's this great story by Peretz about the golem. It's both sad and funny, but the golem starts killing all the non-Jews and says, "What are we going to do? We won't have Shabbos Goys anymore." I think it's only 2 paragraphs. It's a fantastic about the golem, and it's. I don't know whether it's sad or it's funny. Or
well,
both.
That's it. The point is, it's full of irony. We understand the ironic part of it. I mean, Dara Horn. I never read the novel, but she has a novel that's set during the Civil War or something, where Jews of the South are celebrating Passover, and they have their slaves serving them on Passover. And of course, you can do that in fiction, and fiction will ridicule and mock and satirize, an internal irony that here are the Jews, celebrating their freedom when they have people that are not free underneath them.
It's a good book. You should read it.
Yeah. Bob asks, would you be in favor or opposed to depicting the 10 Commandments with Shabbat in the center and the other 9 commandments emanating out like the rays of the sun? And I wouldn't, only with the understanding that, of course, visual depictions limit they're midrashim, and we, even what I've given you today and putting it on the screen is a kind of, I at the very least a midrash of this. I'm saying that when you suddenly try and break habits of understanding, depictions, and move beyond them, you do see different sides to this. And at the very least, what I've tried to do today is saying, that depiction of the tablets, 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 is not helpful, because there are different truths that emerge when you examine the text as a text with different principles. The principle that I've tried to show here is that if you look at the symmetry of the text just on the basis of the number of words and letters, you see that the center of the text, the fulcrum of the text, is not honor your parents, which never made sense to me altogether, despite hundreds of sermons. The fulcrum of the text is Shabbat, which makes total sense to me. That's the link. That's the foundation. That's the cornerstone. That's, if you were to say to me, what's the one Jewish thing I should do? I would say, do something connected to Shabbat. I don't care whatever else you do. Go eat on Yom Kippur. Go, I don't know. One Jewish thing, do something, do a fraction of a thing for Shabbat. And that is more Jewish than anything else. And that's a very Jewish thing to say, by the way, a very rabbinic thing to say. We have Marlene and Skip. Go ahead.
So various other commandments were given a quid pro quo. Do this and you'll have a long life. Do that and you'll have a long life. And nowhere does it say, be sure to keep these, except that we get it as a commandment and then we get it repeated again in another book.
So you're highlighting a very interesting question, which is some command, including honoring your parents. By the way, it says honor your parents, you'll live a long life. It also says remove the mother hen from the thing, you'll get a long life. And so these raise all sorts of interpretive questions: why some commandments, why others, and we can come up with some very, very lovely answers to that. I would say, the whole enterprise of trying to explain the commandments, I think, is the enterprise of Jewish study. That's what we're trying to do. Where, why do we do this? Why do we do that? And can we explain, this commandment and the tzitzit and the tefillin and all that? And by creating the enterprise of ta'amei mitzvot, the meaning of the mitzvot, you establish for yourself a system of living that gives you meaning. Look, in the end, I'm going to get cornered by everyone here, including myself, in saying, even when the Torah, and the rabbis already saw this, the Torah promises a lot of things, and sometimes it doesn't happen. It says honor your parents and you'll live a long life. Well, we know plenty of people who honored their parents and had their lives tragically cut short. And so how do you reconcile that? That's what faith is about. Faith is not about able to give simple answers to very, very complicated questions. Go ahead, John.
I think theologically that comes through in the book of Job,
Exactly.
Because Deuteronomy is black and white, but Job is gray.
Exactly. Job, has to wrestle with this and has to try and define a life that is worthy and blameless, and fold into his life the terrible, terrible tragedies of suffering that he's experienced. And most people, if you live your life, as I think I would say, without a doubt, every single person here has had to deal with those questions at one or another time in their lives, for sure. We all know. But we don't want to lead on that note. I want to say that if you have the opportunity to do Shabbat, do it and make it. And if you do it more, because you'll get more joy out of it. And that's the point. The point is that it may not add years to your life, but it adds life to your years. That's the bottom line. All right. I'm so sorry we have to end it there, because I could go on for another half an hour. Okay.